Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished veteran turned coach, Mr. John Lazar from Chicago area, USA. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Ashutosh.
John is the founder and CEO of John B. Lazar and Associate Incorporated since 1995, and he's a Vietnam War veteran in the 1967 to 1970 period. So, John, let's talk about John Lazar and Associates. Tell me a little bit about what you do here.
Sure. So it is a coaching and consulting firm.
Mm-hmm.
There are three service lines. One is leadership and executive coaching.
Mm-hmm.
One is team development, and one is what I call blended solutions, which is a combination of coaching and consulting.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for the third service line is that most issues that organizations are dealing with are complex and messy, which is one way of saying that there are multiple things going on, multiple root causes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I know, and perhaps you as well, is that for any problem you have, there's a bunch of different things that contribute to the problem, and there's a bunch of things that could be brought to bear to help resolve or solve it.
Very interesting.
So this way, it allows me to be more intervention agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to because I've got a hammer. You look like a nail to me.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, rather than let the sense making of the data suggest what intervention or interventions might be appropriate, and how to put that together in an integrated way to make best use of any synergies that might be there, and best service, most cost-effective service to the client.
Very interesting. So before I go any further, when I was growing up, and you and I are probably of the same vintage, coaching and mentoring was done either by a family elder or by someone in the company who took a liking for you, or in the army, maybe, or the Navy, someone who was a senior officer. What has changed over the years that people are now looking for professional advice and are willing to pay for it?
It's a great question. I think there's a greater recognition now than ever before that anybody in a position of authority, anybody in a position of leadership doesn't necessarily have all the answers.
Correct.
And as the world moves faster, as things become more complicated and complex, there is more to consider, more perspectives to consider, more implications to consider, and the ability for one to be a heroic leader, in the sense that I think we all know it, becomes increasingly ill-equipped and ill-suited to the world in which we find ourselves, and the kinds of thoughtful but complex decisions that people need to make. So I think that people who think beyond if it's going to be, it has to be me, are coming to the conclusion that if I had a good partner, I could be able to go further, faster, and with fewer bumps and bruises along the way. Who might that partner be?
Well said.
And so there's some opening, but it varies. It varies in terms of age. It varies in terms of industry sector. It varies in terms of level of sophistication of the company in the marketplace. There are a number of different variables that contribute. Some industries are more open to taking advantage of that than others.
Fascinating. So I'm going to ask you about the Navy. What did the Navy teach you about coaching?
I love the question. So the reason I joined the Navy back in the 60s was because I was unable to give myself the discipline that I felt I needed in order to move forward in my life. And I was hoping that the Navy would. In my opinion, for the most part, the Navy didn't.
Okay.
However, while I was in the Navy and stationed in Key West, Florida, I met a civilian, a guy 40 years older than me, piano player. And we got to talking over time. We would kind of find each other at the beach when I was off duty, and got to talking, and he befriended me. And he befriended me at a time when I was not a good friend to myself. And that authentic friendship, his name is Lyle Weaver, that authentic friendship on his part did more for me to make me think about, well, maybe I am worthy of being a friend to somebody. Maybe I can do something with my life, such that I made a private declaration to myself that if I ever got out of the Navy, I would go back to school because I had flunked out of college. I would go back to school and I would complete my undergraduate degree, and I would do something with my life where I could make a difference for other people in the way that Lyle had made for me.
Wow.
And in fact, that's what I did. I went back to school, got my undergraduate degree, got my graduate degree in clinical developmental psychology, worked with severely profoundly handicapped kids and their families, had a private psychotherapy practice, changed careers in 1983. So for 50 years, more than 50 years, I had been living inside of that declaration that came out of my Navy experience that had virtually nothing to do with what the Navy provided.
Amazing. Okay. My next question to you is that what, in your view, is the benefit an individual can get from a coach?
Self-awareness, perspective,
okay,
challenging old assumptions and expectations and beliefs, thought partnership, education, learning things in new areas, accountability partner.
Right. Well said.
That's a start, and a safe space and a container for deep, respectful listening.
Correct. I agree with you completely. Again, a question, John, that I've often been asked is, how long should a coaching engagement be for?
No one answered. Part of it depends. Part of it depends on what the client wants to get and what their standard is for what success will be.
Right.
Ultimately, it always comes down to that. So, for example, because oftentimes what we're talking about is changing our habits. One way of thinking about it is like we want to change our old practices to new practices that are better fitted and more effective in the world in which we find ourselves, and are better connected to the commitments and cares that we currently have, not the ones that may have been there historically, right? Now, if all you want is to see some progress in that direction, to get started down that road, and to see and to have evidence that, yes, I'm moving in that direction, and I have a plan of action, that may be available within 3-6 months.
Okay.
If your standard is, I want to be working on this long enough that I have created the new neural pathways to where it's not simply a practice, it's becoming a habit, or is a habit, that might be a year or 18 months.
Okay.
Even 2 years. It took us years to create the habits that we're now in. They ain't going to change overnight.
Correct. Agree with you. And a question that is often asked again is that while a coach does give a lot of inputs in his or her own way to a coachee, how does a coachee determine whether they have a good coach? How do they evaluate a coach?
Probably a couple things. One, and this is all ultimately relatively subjective. Mm-hmm. Do I feel okay with this person? Is there, you talk about a chemistry conversation.
Correct.
So why do you do that? And so you have a little bit of experience that you can use as a basis for formulating initial opinions mm-hmm. about the person, how they operate with you, how they think, and whether you think, it's your own projection of, do I think I could work with this person as my coach? So there's that chemistry, however you get at that. Mm-hmm. There's what their approach is and how well does that fit. Mm-hmm. There is, how is this going to go? In other words, how is our work going to be structured? And does this fit? Mm-hmm. And does this person over time, are they their word? Mm-hmm. Do they do what they say they're going to do? In other words, are they building, in addition to building respect with me as the client, are right. they building trustworthiness mm-hmm. with me as being competent and capable and reliable mm-hmm. and of good character? And ultimately, are we making progress? Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly enough, there's a lot of research that says like the feel-good stuff isn't necessarily a great indicator of doing effective work, because a lot of the work that we're doing, almost all the work that we do as coaches with our clients, mm-hmm. by necessity and design, is inviting and nudging our clients to move into areas of discomfort. Mm-hmm. And in fact, is endorsing that unless you are working in this area that you're kind of uncomfortable to be in, you're not working on the area where growth and learning is going to occur in the first place. You don't need a coach to have you feel comfy and cozy. That isn't what the nature of the work is. The nature of the work is to challenge yourself. Growth is uncomfortable.
I agree with you. I agree. And
so if you're able, go ahead.
That's a great response. And a follow-up question to that, John, would be that what do you look for in a coachee before you decide to take her or him on to coach them?
Well, I've got preferences, but it seldom turns out exactly that way.
Uh-huh.
That said, I want somebody who's ambitious. Mm-hmm. And by ambitious, what I mean is ambitious to be a better version of themselves. Mm-hmm. I prefer somebody who is looking at themselves and is looking beyond themselves. Mm-hmm. In other words, they're looking at like, what's my purpose? What's the higher good I want to be able to bring, mm-hmm. the larger impact I want to have. Mm-hmm. I want somebody preferably who is or can become flexible in their thinking. Mm-hmm. I want somebody who recognizes that it ain't going to be a straight line.
Correct.
And that it's going to take, this is potentially a journey of a lifetime, not necessarily mm-hmm. with me for a lifetime, mm-hmm. but lifelong learning. And this is a piece of that journey, mm-hmm. and are excited as well as perhaps anxious or even terrified mm-hmm. by the thought of that, because it being on this journey takes courage.
Correct.
To be willing to let go of the identity that you have of yourself for the sake of the possibility of who you can become.
Well said. Well said.
Well said. It takes courage.
And when you look at coaching an emerging leader or a senior leader, what would your approach be in these two individuals?
I think it's going to be more similar than not. I suppose. I want to get to know them in their context. It doesn't help them for me to have my own whatever the heck it is that I'm making up about what their world is and how they think. But I want to get to know them in their context, what matters to them, what are the things that move and drive them, what are the things that they're being held accountable for in the organizational sense. Most of the work that I do is organizational coaching work. It's good to know what a bit of history and what's worked before, what hasn't worked. It's good to have access to data. So being able to use a personality assessment or to do 360 interviews or to use a leadership tool, a leadership assessment tool of some sort. Not simply for the data itself, but for the conversations that the data will provoke. Because ultimately the data is simply the data. There's where things happen is, what do we say about it? What do we do with it?
Very interesting.
And so being able to have that, those become backdrops and inputs for formulating what towards what end, what's likely to be steps along the way, and how that might best be orchestrated, understanding the thing that, as they say, luggage may shift in flight, but things are likely to change.
Yeah, very interesting. My next question is that what else do you draw upon to inform and empower your coaching?
What aids?
What else?
What else? Got it. So, as I said before, I have a psychology background. I have studied the study of what it is to be a human being for 40 years.
Okay.
Study of ontology. So philosophy of language. Philosophy of language. I'm trained as a performance improvement consultant. So things about human performance technology, looking at the larger context in which performers find themselves. To give you a factoid, in organizational settings, for any particular individual performer, somewhere between 70 and 80% of the variance that influences how a performer performs are a function of management.
Okay.
So management systems, management structures, management processes, policies and procedures, who your boss is and how they manage and lead you. All of that is management. 15 to 25% resides with the individual performer. And yet the common wisdom is fix them, train them, and don't look at the larger context. So I would say, because I've been trained in this work and in these perspectives and how to use them, it gives me a richer set of places to be curious about as to what's contributed to this, what may need to be addressed directly or worked with indirectly to reduce the adverse impact. The notion of what can you control, what can you influence, what can you just release back to the universe. That kind of a premise continues to make sense in the work that I do with my clients. Wonderful. Is that relevant on point?
No, it answers a lot of interesting questions that I had in my mind. My next question to you, and I have time for two more questions. What are some of the special projects you are working on?
Well, one that is near and dear to my heart is a project around social innovation. With three other colleagues in the last year or two, we created an award for social innovation, named after the late C.K. Prahalad, who was a business professor and consultant and extraordinary innovator in the field of social innovation and social impact. And we launched that. We launched the awards in 2021. In December of last year, we announced 4 winners in the categories of product and service, social innovation, and bottom of the pyramid. And we will have the award ceremony virtually on the 29th of March. Wow. But what goes along with that? So it's been fantastic to work with my colleagues to identify an international group of jurors who would judge the candidates, to be in contact with the candidates. What's been a lot of fun is, out of this, among other things, will be publications. And so I am going to be co-editing the volumes on social innovation with my colleague Mariano Bernardes, and I am co-author of 4 of the chapters for that book. Wow. 1 with Mariano and 2 with other candidates from the awards, and 1 with a gentleman here who's here in the States doing important community work. So just because I published a coaching journal for 9 years, some of the most fun that I had was helping our authors find their voice and get their piece into publishable form. And I'm having similar levels of joy in working on these articles with my colleagues. It's been a great privilege.
Fascinating.
So,
and just
so
one
that's
more,
one of the
fantastic.
Yeah,
one more question. When you talk social innovation, what areas are you looking at?
We're looking broadly. It's like, so we're talking about having a positive social benefit. Lots of different places that can show.
Yeah.
So for example, there is a catering company here in the Chicago area called Belarus Catering, and they were one of the candidates for the first Prahalad Award. And the work that they do is not in catering. What they saw was that there were communities that were being underserved in terms of having access to food and access to the right food.
Okay.
And Maya Ratmanzade, the CEO and founder of Belarus, said, there's something we can do about this. And so she went about not only identifying who could be sources of food, but who could be distributors of food, that would be donated, that otherwise would be thrown away.
Yeah.
And how could you get it? And then how could we repackage it? Identifying partners in the communities in Lake County, north of Chicago, and making food available in a respectful way at no cost to families. And the foodstuffs were the appropriate food that they knew about, could digest, knew how to cook, things like that. And she's delivering in less than a year and a half. This happened during the pandemic. Millions of meals. Millions of meals.
Amazing.
And so that's one example. The work that my colleague Sue Kahumbu in Nairobi is doing to help smallholder farmers be more effective in terms of their livestock and their crops. A company in India that is helping communities build infrastructure, but the community itself is accountable for running the projects that make that happen. The Sinotrack in Beijing that is doing tech-driven work with organizations to empower their workers to be more effective and therefore have a better work life, have a better dynamic work-life balance. You kind of get a sense of the breadth of places where social innovation could show up.
Amazing. John, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me at length about coaching and your thoughts on coaching. Thank you for talking to me about your social innovation program and the amazing work that you are doing to support such amazing organizations in so many different countries, in so many different spheres. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.